Welcome to Future Consideration. That is Dan Rubenstein. I'm Susanna Collins, pinch hitting for Matt Ufford this week. Now, last week you guys talked about what the best teams do in the draft. This week, we're talking about what the worst teams do in the draft. Wah is right. Now, over the past 5 seasons, the worst teams in the NFL by regular season record have been the Jaguars, the Browns, the Titans, the Raiders, and the Bucs. So we're going to take a look at what they have done over the past 8 seasons in the draft that have contributed to them and their woeful inability to escape the NFL basement. Dan, let's look at first round.
Let's start first round.
What trends jump out at you?
So first of all, before we even get into the first round, 2 of these teams, the Bucs and the Jags, have had 56 picks, which they should have over this span of time. But the average of the 5 best teams is around 70. And then the Bengals have had 75. So a lot of the best teams, a lot of the better teams just have more picks to work with, which is huge. In the first round itself, the big thing that jumps out is offensive skill. And obviously, these are teams that have needed a quarterback for a considerable amount of time. Some of whom have found a quarterback, some of whom, Cleveland, have struggled. So really, the focus is on offense for the 5 worst teams, whereas the focus is for the league about 50-50 for the best teams, actually a lot more defense. So the value is different there. Also, offensive linemen are not valued as much by the worst teams in the first round. The Raiders and the Bucs since 2008 have drafted 0 offensive linemen. The span that we've looked at, the Raiders actually won since 2000. So really not a lot of valuing of offensive linemen early in the first round.
Wow. So basically, if you're not the Cleveland Browns, then you don't want to touch the shiny new toy. You don't want to see those wide receivers are out there, those running backs, but you kind of want to.
Yeah, the Titans also have drafted, in their 8 drafts, 7 offensive players. They really have focus there. It's hard for a lot of these teams to pass up the shiny offensive skill.
All right, so with that said, when you look at the early rounds, 1 through 3 as a whole, what do you see?
So this is where the offensive skill valuing sort of flops. The best teams go after offensive skill in the 2nd and 3rd round. They don't see a huge difference between first round offensive skill and 2nd and 3rd. They think there's value there. Whereas the worst teams tend to start drafting defense a little bit more. They're sort of catching up. They see what the best teams and maybe the average teams are doing in the first round, and then they start looking at that in the 2nd and 3rd round. They start drafting more defensive linemen. Still not as many defensive backs, which is scary because in a league that is weighted towards quarterbacks, towards the passing games, the best teams, even the average teams, are drafting defensive backs earlier and earlier than the worst teams. And offensive linemen start getting drafted in the 2nd and 3rd round, but that's when the best teams sort of stop drafting offensive linemen.
So moving on to the later rounds, where getting quality value is paramount. Dan, what do the numbers look like?
So I know what you're saying. They stop drafting offensive skill positions, the worst teams. They're going to start doing it again, like at an incredible rate. So in later rounds, the best teams, and even to a certain extent, the league average, stops drafting offensive skill with the sort of, I don't know, enthusiasm that they did earlier on. And you can grab so many undrafted free agents. We saw what the Patriots have been doing. They do not value the running back, certainly like other teams, maybe like the Chargers have been. And they go after offensive linemen. If you can put together an offensive line that isn't terribly expensive and is pretty young, it's a humongous win. And so it's offensive linemen, defensive linemen for the best, and the worst teams, this is when they start drafting defensive backs a little bit more. So if you ever wonder why these teams look so porous on defense, it's because at the end of the draft they're saying, oh God, we got to fill up that side of the ball.
Mode.
That's what it is. And the Jags, especially on the offensive line, they've struggled there. 14 of their 15 late round picks since 2008 on offense have been skill players. 94%. So not a great look in valuing line play from the worst teams.
Staggering. It seems so simple. It seems like a fairly simple formula. Let's focus on defense. Let's focus on offensive line.
Yeah, the name of the game is so clearly with the cap, how much cheap, quality, young talent can you amass? And it's just not happening for the worst teams in the NFL.
All right, well, hopefully all of these teams are listening because Dan is the man with the answers. That's all the time we have.
Yes.
Thank you so much for watching. Matt will be back next week, and we'll see you then.